Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. And I'd like to welcome our speakers, our NTU alumni, as well as our guests, and any of you who just joined us by invitation from our alumni, from our friends, and so forth. My name is Chung Lai Hong. I am an accounting professor at Nanyang Business School, and also assistant dean responsible for alumni relations at Nanyang Business School. We are really delighted to be able to be back in Bangkok. I think as part of our alumni activities, we do go to different countries and cities. And I think the last time we were in Bangkok, of course, was pre-COVID, probably about 5 years ago. So it's with great delight that I return here this evening. To our alumni who are here, thanks for coming to this event. Thanks for connecting with us and for sharing with your friends about NTU and NBS. As NBS has a growing alumni body, we have about 60,000, actually more than 60,000 alumni. And in order to cater to the needs of our overseas alumni, we are very thankful for the support of our NTU alumni associations, as well as our international alumni representatives. They help us in various ways, and I heard that just a couple of weeks ago, the NTU Alumni Association here in Thailand had a gathering, and they were able to get together and had a good time. So we thank you all for supporting NTU and NBS by connecting with us in your own, wherever you are. Right now, please give me just a few minutes just to update you, as we have a significant number of alumni here, about what is happening at NTU and NBS. I think some of you who were in the room earlier could have seen the corporate video, but let me just briefly tell us a bit about what's happening. You would know that NTU welcomed a new president this year, Professor Ho Teck Hwa, who is now leading the university as our 5th president. Prof. Ho is a prominent behavioral scientist, known globally, and we are very excited with his vision to continue to lead NTU to even greater heights. For Nanyang Business School, we are very delighted that we moved in the brand new building, which we have been looking forward to for many years. We just moved in June this year and started our classes there in August this year. The building is called Gaia, named after the Greek goddess of Earth, and designed by a Japanese architect, famous Toyo Ito, a Pritzker Prize recipient, known for his designs incorporating very natural elements of nature. Gaia is the largest wooden structure in Asia, and we're also happy to note, given our team on sustainability, that it's a net zero building. So we dress less formally these days because we have fresh air when we step out of our offices. Gaia, therefore, is beautiful, and if you're in Singapore for any reason, do drop by, and we're most welcome to take you on the tour of it, as well as the rest of our very beautiful NTU campus. Nanyang Business School is glad that we are a business school in a very leading technological university, and so we draw on the best of both engineering and other schools that are in NTU, and best of both Asia and the West, so that we inspire both innovation in various areas, leadership and transformation through the research that we do at NTU, through our sustainable innovation and very holistic education. Hosting forums, panel discussions, and fire chats like we have today is some of the ways which NBS seeks to share the deep knowledge that our faculty has in various areas, as well as our alumni, and also to partner with industries. And also through these avenues that we support the continuous education and learning of our many alumni. At this point, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speakers. First, ladies first, we have Ms. Anlee Vando. Anlee is the General Manager of the Lufthansa Group for Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, and the Mekong region. She's very passionate about sustainable aviation. She's also a board member of the German-Thai Chamber of Commerce, also alumni advisory board member of our Nanyang Business School, and also past vice chairperson of the German Business Association of Vietnam. She has over 15 years of work experience in the aviation industry. Anlee, of course, is also our NBS alumna, having graduated from our executive MBA program, focusing on aviation management. I last saw Anlee about a year ago in Ho Chi Minh, and here she is in Bangkok today, and she'll tell you more about herself, perhaps later. The second speaker is my esteemed colleague, Prof. Viswanathan. Prof. Vish is a distinguished professor of operations and corporate sustainability, director of our Center for Business Sustainability, and also the cluster director at our Energy Research Institute at NTU. His varied research interests include corporate sustainability, energy modeling, supply chain systems, and so forth. And he has published widely in many journals, and also currently working on many research, and such as his latest project in Singapore's pathway to carbon neutrality analysis of new technologies. He now teaches corporate sustainability in many of our graduate and executive programs at NTU. So what we're going to do this evening is that we'll start with our Prof. Vish presenting a strategic framework for implementing corporate sustainability efforts. And then this will be followed by a dialogue between Vish and Anlee on sustainability and decarbonization strategies. And then we'll give you an opportunity to ask the bursting questions that you will have at the end of the session. And at this point, I would also like to inform you that we will be recording this session for various purposes, educational and marketing purposes, and NTU may use this recording for various print and digital platforms and marketing channels. And this is just for your information. So without much further ado, let me now welcome my colleague Vish to begin his presentation. Vish, please.
Welcome once again, all of you. So I'm going to make a very quick presentation, and let me time myself to make sure that I don't... Normally, what I present is what I do the first thing in my class. So it's a sort of a strategic framework that I'm very proud of, that I developed. But before I do that, thanks for the kind introduction, Lai Hong. I sort of put this slide here because in case I don't meet you personally, you have the opportunity to scan my online QR code, which is a hello card. Of course, I do have printed cards also. It's just that they are very outdated. So I'm very passionate about sustainability. I started my sustainability journey about 15 years ago. And I call myself a jack of all trades in sustainability. It doesn't mean I'm not a master of anything. I think I know enough about many topics. But what I'm most excited about is that we have lots of different sustainability programs. One we are launching next year is a executive masters and executive MSc in sustainability. But we do have customized program for companies as well. We are very proud to have associated with BCG, having a L&D program for them focused on sustainability. And as you know, BCG consultants advise ministers and CEOs. So we are making a sort of a second moment impact to the world in terms of sustainability, right? I guess the fact that you are here, you know what the grand challenges are. There are many of them. Climate change is something that has become main street, right? And these are articles that I just captured over a few days in the local newspaper in Singapore. And this has been happening for the last 3-4 years. Of course, there are other challenges. I sometimes say that we'll all die of hunger before we drown because of sea level rise. Food is a major challenge too because there's not enough food to go around by the time we get to 2050. So there are different challenges to address, but we are going to focus on climate change and sustainability. There's a lot of stakeholder pressure that goes on as well. Singapore, for example, is a country known to make policy announcements very well in advance. But we have changed our carbon tax policy very quickly. Earlier we said by 2030 we'll be just $10 or $15, but now we are saying it's going to be $50 to $80. And by the time we get to 2050, we don't know. It might be even higher. Of course, the other countries in ASEAN and Asia are taking baby steps. But I have another slide that comes up later, which say the net zero promises made by countries. Even China and India have made promises. And as you know, based on current politics, China doesn't have to be fearful of anybody. But there is so much of peer pressure to do this. And therefore, whether we like it or not, if you work in companies, you need to address sustainability, right? And there are lots of regulations. You might have heard of something called CBAM, which is carbon border adjustment measures. So even within your own country, if you don't have carbon tax, if you're planning to export to United States or to Europe or to US, you still need to decarbonize. Otherwise, you're going to be charged a higher carbon tax, right? So the net zero challenge is the biggest thing. To arrest the global temperature rise to less than 1.5 degrees, we need to get to zero carbon emissions by 2050. And the reason is science-based. The different scientists as well as UNFCCC has sort of done the pathway to temperature scenarios. Unless you get to zero emissions by 2050, even with that, the temperature is going to increase between 1 and 2 degrees. And anything more than that, the temperature increase will be more substantial, and then, of course, humanity faces huge challenges then. And, sorry, I'm going. And these are the net zero promises that have been made by countries, so all the ASEAN countries, but I also included India and China here. And you see that most of them have promised to get to net zero by 2060 or 2070. You might say, oh, they are empty promises. Maybe the answer is, the reality is people haven't sort of figured out how to get there. Singapore was a little bit reluctant to make a net zero promise, but last year we have an annual energy conference called Singapore International Energy Week. We also made a promise, and how we'll get there is a different story. We are actually literally signing deals with most of the ASEAN countries to import green energy, green electricity, because we just don't have enough sustainable energy sources. So I want to come very briefly talk about the sustainable impact reference framework that I developed. It's trying to answer two questions. So if you decide as a company that you need to address sustainability, how do you go about planning, strategizing, and implementing sustainability efforts across the firm? And is there a framework to comprehensively do that? You find that many companies try to align all their activities with SDGs, and they sort of say, oh, I do this, I do zero poverty, I do zero hunger, I do other things. To me, SDGs are a good thing, especially for countries to adopt, but sometimes companies in their excitement trying to align themselves with various SDGs can unwittingly greenwash. For example, if you're a telecom company or a software company, and you just buy a few packets of free food and distribute it to a poorer community in Singapore, which is almost a developed country, and then you say that you are addressing world hunger or zero poverty, that's difficult to buy. And companies, sometimes that's what they do in their sustainability reports. Sometimes you have things like peace, justice, and strong institutions. How can companies do that? Or partnership for goals. Partnership is a means to an end. It's not an end by itself in a sense, right? And these tend to be very output-oriented. So if you're strategizing in the company, it's very difficult to use this. Other companies use materiality analysis, which this is a standard thing that you'll find in sustainability reports, where you do a stakeholder engagement survey or you do internal offsite to find out what is key to the company and what is key to the stakeholders. And then you look at the top right quadrant, and those are things that you try to address in the sustainability report. But again, even though you might identify key issues, for example, it says, oh, carbon emissions. How do you go about reducing carbon emissions? It doesn't tell you how to go about doing it. First of all, of course, before you get to even a framework, if you already have what I call continuous improvement and lean programs in the company, you should probably start there and just do a small pivot. Typically, lean programs in companies are both bottom-up and top-down. And you just need to say that instead of just looking at cost reduction, service improvement, you also start looking at carbon emissions reduction or sustainability improvement. And a lot of times you'll find many such projects where it is what I call both lean and green. And that's something which is very easy to sell to management because you're saving money, yet at the same time, you're actually addressing the global challenges, right? And this is an example. So if you look at installing LED bulbs or solar panel on the roof, these are established to be net present value positive, NPV positive projects. It might take a long time, and therefore if you are cash strapped, you might have to go and take some green loans, sustainable loans, but eventually it will actually pay back, right? And there are business models to help you get there as well. So these are what I call lean and green things. But beyond that, this is a sort of a comprehensive framework in terms of how one can go about addressing them. If I were to go into details of this. It will take me much more than 15 minutes. In a sense, to me, it's common sense. If you come from an operations perspective, you can say that, I mean, most strategic frameworks are common sense. It has to appeal to people who are doing it, in a sense, right? But the main areas are product and process design and process decarbonization, then procurement and supply chain, then looking at aftermarket and circular economy. Circular economy is a hot area now because of the resource constraints. If you happen to be in a company where you don't have a choice as to where you can buy the electricity from, then at least what you can do is to preserve resources through circular economy. And then, of course, overheads and plant and building. So Lai Hong already talked about our net zero energy building. We are very proud of it. And you might again start wondering, if you have a net zero energy building or a green mark platinum building. In Singapore, we call it green mark platinum. Different countries have their own standards. Essentially, if your building is of the highest level, you actually save energy, electricity over a period of time. It might take, the payback period might be long, but eventually you're actually going to save money on the building in a sense, right? So overheads and plant and building. That's sort of a 2-minute summary of what this framework is about. But I'm going to just give you some examples. Within product design itself, you can look at designing for reducing the carbon footprint while creating the product or manufacturing the product. Or you can also create products where during the use of the product, the energy consumption is substantially reduced, right? And I do have a few examples of companies that have actually implemented this. This is Nike. Nike had lots of issues in the 90s with accusations of sweatshops in Indonesia where the workers were not wearing PPE, protective equipment, and they were inhaling fumes. And they turned around and said, can we, rather than having bonding of the sole with the shoe with chemical materials, can we come up with mechanical bonding of the shoes, right? So they started looking at implementing more sustainable design for some shoes. Eventually, they came up with the idea that, I mean, the designers are going to be designing lots of different shoes over a period of time. And you can't be doing a sustainability exercise each time because it's extremely complicated and expensive because you need to talk to your supply chain partners about, and you have to do what's called life cycle analysis. Therefore, they actually came out, just like you have Green Mark Platinum building standards, they came out with the product design index for the company that product designers across Nike could use. Similarly, Herman Miller also came out with what's called the Design for Environment Index for designing their chairs as such, right? There are other examples of process decarbonization. This is what I call a very catchy word, cloud in the sea. In fact, this picture appeared in the newspaper very recently. So if you're looking at IT services in the company and cloud companies, about actually 1.5% of the global emissions come from IT servers and cloud servers. And there's a lot of work going on trying to implement servers under the sea, which reduces the cooling requirement in a sense. So this is what I would call either a product design or a process design innovation. And of course, if you're in the hard-to-abate sectors, there's a lot of new efforts going on. Aviation is one of the hard-to-abate sectors. They're looking at alternative fuels, and we'll discuss more with with Anlee later about it. But electrification of heating processes, that is something companies have started looking at, because when you do heating, you're burning fossil fuels to generate steam or generate heat. How can we do it with green electricity? That's still at its infancy at this stage, but sooner rather than later, many companies will be adopting these things, right? Procurement is another huge area, because if you look at, this is just a very back-of-the-envelope analysis of some companies, and I have their Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are emissions from the suppliers, upstream suppliers as such. And essentially for most companies, if you look at Apple, for example, the amount of emissions from their suppliers as a ratio of the emissions within their own four walls, because they just design, is actually 670 times. Except for the commodity players like steel or aluminum. Hindalco is an Indian aluminum company, where most of the emissions take place within the manufacturing facility itself. For most other companies, most of the emissions is actually upstream in the supply chain. In fact, you could argue that most of the emissions that take place in China or India are actually not because of consumption by Chinese and Indians. It's because most of it is exported to Europe and America. So when you implement CBAM, actually, it makes it the European products more expensive because ultimately the Chinese have to pay for the tax for that in a sense, right? And finally, overheads, plant and building. And I already explained it. If you build a net zero building, it eventually pays off by itself. Yes, initially there is an upfront cost. So either you need to have deep pockets to be able to do it, or you need to talk to banks and get sustainable linked loans. In fact, NTU announced a huge loan as well. I'm not sure the building was funded by it. We have some targets in terms of what we need to achieve. We have not announced a net zero emission plan yet, but by 2035, between 2011 and 2020, we reduced our carbon emissions by 20% all over the campus. And we are planning to reduce it by another 20% in the next 15 to 20 years. And I think we got a $500 million worth of sustainable linked loans, right? So that's plant and building and green IT. Of course, as I said, before you start, you need to pivot existing lean programs because that's something where you can get easy buy-in from the management, right? So that's and ideally if you can implement internal carbon tax. Internal carbon tax is just a transfer payment between the units of the company to the headquarters. That's a way to encourage the unit heads to actually start implementing carbon reduction projects now itself, because you cannot wait till carbon tax is implemented. Right now it might look like, oh, the Thai government doesn't care. Indonesian government recently announced carbon tax, but it's just $2 or less than $2. But eventually we didn't hear about net zero until 2-3 years ago. So things are moving fast, and when the carbon tax hits you, you can't be caught flat-footed. So you need to plan for it. Implementing carbon tax within the company is one way to sort of move your innovation speed across. So to me, ultimately, one of the questions that's always asked is sustainability very costly? How do we do customers care for it? To me, sustainability is also like a technology or innovation play. In the technology field, people are willing to do sandboxing, do innovation because there is a fear of missing out. And therefore, you want to make sure that you don't get behind your competitors. One company should treat sustainability also in the same way, because if you plan ahead and you are ahead of the curve when it comes to regulations, you can actually do well in sustainability as well. So that's sort of a very quick summary of the SURF framework. I'm going to just leave this code for a moment, the QR code for a moment, so that you can get my card. Let me now ask, Anlee has already been introduced by Lai Hong, so let me ask Anlee to join on the stage. Thank you, Anlee.
Thank you, Professor. So hello, everyone. Now I'm feeling missing out. I didn't have this kind of thing. So anyway.
Yeah. This idea was introduced to me by my partners in BCG, because they always, of course, they also have a real card as well. In fact, what I plan to do in my next card is to make sure that the QR code is on the card itself, so that people want to scan it. If you scan it, you can also get my LinkedIn link, as well as my email addresses and mobile phone.
Even have your picture on it. I tried just now.
Yeah, I have my picture too. Right? Pictures are very important. So when I first got my picture in my card, I thought only real estate salesmen and car salesmen do it. But then you realize you meet so many people. Without the picture, there's no way you can remember them.
Yeah.
So I would put a picture too.
Yes.
Take a seat.
All right.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Anlee, for doing this. And as Lai Hong mentioned, Anlee is one of our proud alumna. She graduated from our EMBA program some years ago. And she has been in the aviation industry for a long time. So we are going to talk about aviation decarbonization eventually. But before we do that, to get Anlee warmed up, Lai Hong's introduction was short. So maybe I'll first let you a chance to introduce yourself and talk about why you're passionate about sustainability first.
I mean, it's great that we're doing a warm-up, because I'm actually getting very cold now with the AC in this room. So first of all, hi everyone. My name is Anlee, and I'm from Vietnam originally. Born and raised in Saigon, and I mean, I work for aviation industry since the last 15 years plus, It was my first job after graduation, and somehow I still stayed. I didn't graduate yet from this school. So, and the reason why I'm very passionate about aviation is, first of all, I do see the changes of a lot of things around us, because I spent the last 15 years really traveling a lot between Southeast Asia and Europe. And I do see a difference of weather and landscape during the last 15 years. So I grew up, in a smaller town compared to Bangkok, so in Saigon. And I remember it used to be, not so much high-rise building, and you have fresh air, and basically everything is actually pretty clean. Then now I moved back to Vietnam in 2019, right before the pandemic. I just see that the city have progressed so much, which I'm really happy to see, but also you have haze and you have smoke all around. In Singapore, you also have seen this hazy environment quite often during the time I was there. And in Germany, which is where I'm going quite often, we have always, every year, the hottest summer ever. So every single year is a new record. And this year was exceptionally strange. So I was there in summer. One week was so hot, and the other week it was as cold as the winter in Australia, which was really where I was heading right after Germany. So I was like, this is absolutely crazy, because you have never seen weather change to the extent of weekly basis. And therefore, this is something that is quite close to my heart. And once something is close to your heart, you are actually becoming a good advocate for that. So therefore, I would say I'm passionate about it, because I really believe that we can make changes. And I'm also quite proud that I work for the brand which actually commit to the fact that we want to make change flight. We want to make flying more sustainable. So that's why, I've been talking a lot about this topic, and hopefully to also gain more traction and awareness from the public on this.
Okay, great. We're going to spend quite a bit of time discussing sustainable aviation. And as I mentioned, aviation is one of the hard-to-abate sectors. 4 or 5 years ago, I used to actually openly remark in my class that sustainable aviation is an oxymoron. How can you have aviation that is... But now, after learning more about it, I think it's possibly a challenge that can be addressed, and we'll talk more about it. And it's a huge challenge, because aviation accounts for about 1.5 to 2% of the global carbon emissions. And for most of us who are working professionals, even if you're a vegetarian, commuting to work by public transport, the thing that will kill us in terms of carbon, there are lots of internet websites where you can measure our carbon emissions. The one thing that will kill us is the holidays that we take, right? So if you fly by plane, short haul, like I did this morning, imagine that we had a high-speed rail. We have been talking about a high-speed rail to KL for many years now, and the hope is that eventually maybe it'll reach Bangkok. If you compare to flying by rail, if you take short haul airline, the emissions is as much as about 300 to 400 times, right? So that's so aviation is a huge sustainability killer. But before we get to aviation, Anlee, you've been, as Lai Hong mentioned, you are a board member in the German-Thai Chamber of Commerce, as well as vice chairperson earlier in the German Business Association in Vietnam. So I'm sure you're familiar with other sectors as well. So for the benefit of the audience, before we get to the specific aviation sector, what are some of the basic or first things that companies should do when they begin their sustainability journey?
So we have a very mixed background here. Some of you are really specialized in sustainability. Some of you are really here because you're interested and want to get to know more. So I'm trying to say it in a very basic way. So many companies want to do sustainability, and what I see is that we need to understand the principle, right? And the principle for me is really based on the 3 things: why, how, and what. So to understand the why, a lot of people just, said, okay, yeah, of course we have to reduce emissions and so on, but we need to also know why CO2 is not good for us, right? And the reason why, always try to remember, is that the atmosphere is something quite transparent and you don't see it above us. And the reason when we have more CO2 on the atmosphere, it makes the atmosphere become more solid. And therefore, the heat of the sun coming into the earth cannot really escape. and things get hotter and hotter inside. So that is the reason why we actually have to reduce CO2 emissions in order to actually have a balancing life here on Earth. Because otherwise, we're seeing now things are getting hotter and hotter, weather are changing, and on actually is affecting to own the food chain, on the supply chain that human beings are now having on Earth. So the why is very important for people to always remember why we need to reduce greenhouse gas. And then sometimes when it's just very trendy to run after things, people forget the actual why we have to do that, right? The second thing is about the how. For me, every industry most probably have a different how of doing things, but it comes back to one basic thing, that is the mindset. I think you also mentioned just now, a lot of companies are really hesitating of paying for sustainability project because yes, it costs a lot of money. But also face it, the moment we still look at sustainability as a cost, then we will not actually want to do it. And honestly, it is an investment. And I have a lot of debate with a lot of business partners and so on this topic of the cost side or the investment side of sustainability, but I would always ask back the questions. If you do not want to go for the green way, try to do the opposite. I think the damage is much higher than the investment you would actually pay for sustainability. And last but not least is the what. So the what, I mean, you mentioned already a few things about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So people normally would start actually with scope 1. Some can start right away with scope 1, 2, 3. But I think the baby steps start with scope 1. Scope 1 is where really you try to actually offset from your immediate productions. And scope 2 is starting to be surrounding the supply chain and so on. And last but not least, scope 3, which is on the administration part, on your travel part. So for corporate, actually scope 3, airlines belong to scope 3. And therefore, you know, whenever I'm meeting with clients, I'm always trying to convince people to opt in with us on scope 3 certificate, because right away you already have a solution to get out of scope 3. So yeah, that is the why, how, and what that I normally say is, yeah, it's a principle you should just remember, very basic thing, but then once you get it clear, then you can always find your way to follow up and having, you know, steps to finish it in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Anlee. So just for the benefit of those of you who might not know what scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, very quick definition. Scope 1 is actual emissions from the operations of your own facility. So this hotel building, maybe they have a genset somewhere. So if they're burning diesel to generate energy or air conditioning, that would be scope 1. Scope 2 is electricity that you consume in the building or in the operations of a factory. And depending on which grid it's coming from, the emissions from purchased electricity would be considered as scope 2. And scope 3 is emissions both upstream and downstream in the supply chain. So if you're an oil and gas company, most of their emissions are downstream after they sell the oil. Yes, the scope 1 emissions are pretty huge too in the process of refining the oil. But eventually when the oil is burned up by the power generating company, by aviation and so on, that's when most of the carbon emissions are emitted. So that is in the use phase, as we call. So if you're a company that is still making IC engines based on fossil fuels, then the emissions will be mostly during the use phase. Of course, I showed that slide with Apple and other companies. It's also the embedded carbon of the things that you buy, right? So that's where the CBAM rule is coming from, because they want to make sure that there's a level playing field. And any exports that go from countries in this part of the world to Europe, you have to end up eventually paying a high carbon tax, right? So what Anlee is saying is, start with scope 1, start with your own emissions first, decarbonize that first, then scope 2, find out ways in which you can improve the energy efficiency, and maybe try to find alternative sources of energy like installing solar panel on the rooftop and so on, and then go to scope 3. So now we are going to focus specifically on aviation. And as I mentioned, aviation is a very hard to abate sector. It's about 2 to 3% of the global carbon emissions. There are no obvious solutions available, which is why 5 years ago I would have said sustainable aviation is an oxymoron, right? But there are solutions that companies like Lufthansa are very seriously considering, and there might be ways in which things can be addressed. So the big elephant in the room is really the carbon emissions from the flight itself. But before we get there, there might be other obvious things that aviation should be doing to address sustainability challenges. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So maybe I just based on the concept, I just talked to you guys about why, how, and what, right? So let's start with the why aviation actually need to try to reduce carbon emissions. So first of all, our carbon emissions mostly coming from the fuel we use for the aircraft because it's fossil fuel, right? And even though we are only at around 2.8 to 3% of global carbon emissions, but we have to work on reducing. It's simply because we foresee the demand for traveling will not reduce in the futures. It will just become more and more, and flying is very accessible, very convenient for everyone now. So that is really the reason why we actually have to focus on. And we're talking about, you know, how and what. So the mindset for me is clear. So I think most of the airlines actually have committed to, you know, a clear target of 2030 and 2050. So for my company, basically, we are really sure that we want to reach 2030 with half of the amount of carbon emissions of 2019, which is before the pandemic. And then by 2050, it's really, you know, neutral, right? And what are we trying to do with that? So there are three things you can do in aviation, but I'm talking now really on behalf of Lufthansa Group because this is also the only airline that I work for until now, so I can't really tell from how the other perspective of the other airlines. But here in the company, what we're trying to do is, first of all, we actually avoid flying is actually one of the things we are trying to do. And you must be wondering, I mean, it must be crazy to set an airline saying people to avoid flying, but actually it's possible. So there is something called the intermodality concept. So meaning actually connecting the train to a public transportation system or to a railway system. And this has been a success for us in Europe. So we have, at the moment, from our hub operations, so we have in Germany, Switzerland, we have also in Belgium, Austria, and in the Netherlands, we have total 56 destinations that the moment people get out from the aircraft, they can transfer right away to a train connections. And one example is that every single flight domestically from Germany in Frankfurt hub actually can be replaced with a train connection. It's up to the customer to choose it. So the shorter flight is basically replaceable with train, and by that, we already help to reduce the CO2 emissions. So that is one part about avoiding. The second part is really trying to reduce. So what does the airline do to reduce emissions when we actually still need to fly with fuel, right? The solution is actually buying new aircraft. So the newer the equipment is, then it actually consumes less fuel. So for example, so my company invests a huge investment. We invest now 2.5 billion euro in buying 200 new aircraft and gonna be delivered all the way until 2030. So averagely, meaning every 10 days, we get a new aircraft into our fleet and we replace with the old one. And why are we doing that? So a new aircraft of the modern version actually consumes 30% less fuel compared to the previous version. So that is an immediate effect of kicking out the CO2 emissions. So that is a big investment from the airlines, right? And then another thing that you can also do is to actually replace fossil fuel with something called the sustainable aviation fuel. So in short, it's SAF or SAF. And this kind of fuel is actually, at the moment, is made from used cooking oil. So I was always joking that if you cook more, you are basically also trying to help to serve the world. So at the moment, this is a technology for now. The supply is actually quite limited, but okay, Lufthansa Group managed to be the biggest airline in Europe using this. So we are quite lucky with the supply from our side, but I know globally the supply problem is there, and to scale up the production of SAF, it will take several years from now. Yeah, so that is the part about, you know, trying to reduce. And then there's another part which is called compensation, and this is really something more long run. So besides, you know, fuel, buying new aircraft or using train as connections, then we also invest into green projects around the world. So we have projects in Vietnam, we have projects in Brazil. So this is really to build up, you know, forest and green projects all over, But this for me is not an immediate effect, right? Because when you try to build up a forest, it takes years until then. Yeah, but okay, of course the effort is going on, but the measurement right away, I would say it actually lay on the fact that we buy new aircraft and using SAF. That's how an airline actually can do to basically go forward to the neutrality of CO2 emissions.
Thank you, Anlee. I'm extremely impressed. And the reason I say that is, I actually, when I started the question, I said, the big elephant in the room is the emissions from the flying of the plane itself. And I said, oh, let's start with the low-hanging fruits. Rather than starting with the low-hanging fruits, she plunged head-on with the challenge itself. And that's not something many companies do in their sustainability reports. There are airlines where they'll talk about how they reduce their plastic. Yes, plastic going into ocean is an important challenge, but for an airline, I mean, just reducing a few plastic here and there doesn't mean anything. No. There are airlines where now they don't give amenity kit unless you ask for it, or they don't give you eye shades or whatever unless you ask for it. That's one way to reduce it. It is a good thing to do, but it's a very small drop compared to the aviation fuel itself. And the other thing she mentioned is going multimodal, right? Multimodal effectively means they are reducing their own business. They are actually tying up with the partners in Europe and Germany who are actually the rail operators, and the last mile of the journey is done in the rail. They could very well have decided that, okay, let's have a flight from Munich to Frankfurt. But that would be an absolute no-no, because if they do it, yes, they might make money in the short run, but in front of the stakeholders, they will look silly in a sense. And so you're making place for the long run where you're seen to be a responsible citizen that customers are willing to do business with in a sense. So congratulations on being very upfront about the challenge, right? And the other thing she mentioned is, of course, and I'm going to probably challenge her with some tough questions now. She mentioned that you change your fleet often where the fuel efficiency is 30% higher. That's one way to actually have quick wins in terms of carbon reduction. Yeah. But from a global ecosystem point of view, the aircraft that you sell, maybe it's 10 years old, 12 years old, it's eventually going to be purchased by somebody else. So couldn't somebody argue that you're actually transferring the emissions to somebody else, some other airline who is not as conscious?
Regarding aircraft sales, right? This is something I would say it's rarely that another airline would buy completely an aircraft and use it like how they bought it, I would say. So when you actually buy it, you tend to open up the aircraft completely, and you do something called a D-check. So it's a very big check where you open everything and you check everything, and this is where you can put in certain components to improve it. Okay. So honestly, also for Lufthansa Group, we can do that as well. Yeah, but in the end, after the calculation, we are like, okay, trying to improve the existing aircraft would first of all be time consuming, because we need aircraft now for the new travel demand and so on. And secondly, it will also take time for the supply chain to deliver a new part that we need. So in the end, buying is a better solution. Okay. But then when we sell aircraft, actually people tend to buy, let's say, some actually buy just an engine, some actually just buy this part and that part. Okay. They can buy the whole one, but honestly, the fuselage, which is the one outside, in the end, people actually have their own stuff. So it's more on plug and play. So it's not really you buy the whole thing, you have to use the whole thing, no. Okay. Yeah. And just one comment about the plastic thing, because I always find it's very funny, and my customer normally complain to me about this, that in our aircraft, you notice, sometimes our wine bottle, even serving on first class and business class, actually made from plastic. And everyone was like, why is that? It's not premium. But honestly, changing it from the glass to plastic is actually reduce weight, so that we also consume less fuel on board. And that plastic is reusable, because normally we only change our wine selection after every quarter. So basically you can always reuse the bottle quite sufficiently. But then a lot of people were complaining to me about that, and I'm like, okay, well, let's explain to them why we actually do that. And they're like, oh, okay, great. And honestly, when it falls on the floor, it also will not break. So it's also help in another way as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's not that we are trying to save costs here, but honestly, there's a lot of story behind that. Yeah.
So that's a great insight. So this is where I should introduce this technique called life cycle analysis. So what she's saying is that, yes, maybe glasses are more sustainable because you can use it several times, but having so many glasses in the plane actually increases the weight. And therefore, you're going to consume more fuel. So it's better to actually have plastics instead. But you make sure that the plastics don't reach the ocean.
Yeah, it's not one way, one time use. So
you
it's
sort of
really on-way recycle.
recycle and reuse it. And my hope eventually is that, so if, I mean, we are not there yet in the aviation sector, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this. So when Lufthansa actually sells a less efficient plane and they replace with a more efficient plane, she said that it's a plug and play, but different people buy different components. But the hope in the future will be that we have a the ideal circular economy where the parts are actually taken back and they're remanufactured into a new plane. And when that happens, because the metals that are used in aeroplanes are very precious, they're very light, maybe it contains a combination of titanium and aluminum and so on, and you don't want that to go into landfills. You want them to be, and there's no point in melting and using it again because you're using a lot of energy. The ideal way is, can you actually create a new plane out of it, which is as efficient as a brand new Lufthansa aircraft? And that's where probably the industry will move eventually, in a sense.
Can I say another thing about plastic? Because I really like this topic because I have a lot of debate with with a lot of clients regarding plastic. Another way we use plastic is actually we mimic the skin of the shark. So you know, shark is actually a big animal swimming in the oceans, right? And there's a lot of pressure on the shark. And then we did a study why shark actually swim so quickly, and some of them are very fat. So normally, if you're a fat animal, you know, you move slower, right? But sharks are super quick. So after we did the study, we realized that the shark skin is not really equal. So the shark skin is like this. It's like it have a friction on it, and that actually helped to reduce all the forces around, and it makes the shark swim very quickly. So we actually produce the same kind of skin, but transparently and from plastic, and put on our aircraft. So now, sometimes when you fly Lufthansa or Swiss International Airlines, and you see there is an icon said, it's the shark fin technology, that aircraft actually have a completely transparent plastic film on, and that helps the aircraft to actually fly more effortlessly, and therefore it saves really fuel. Okay. No, it's covered everywhere. Yeah, so it's covered the whole aircraft, but you don't see the film because it's completely transparent. And actually from plastic. So very special kind of plastic that can withstand also with heat and everything else. Of course, we have to change it, but calculation-wise, with the amount of fuel we save, that really helps. Okay. So that is also another topic of plastic that also I like to debate with my clients sometimes. So, yeah.
Great to hear that. So I talked about the SURF framework. This is what I would say is an example of, from the point of view of the aircraft manufacturers, it's a product design. For them, it's a process design because they don't manufacture the aircraft. They're actually using it, the shark's fin, as a process to improve the fuel consumption, right? And essentially aerodynamically adjust it, right? I wanted to ask you one more question before we move to the audience and have the interaction. And this is going away from the aviation sector in an indirect way. I mentioned at the beginning that the even greater challenge other than climate change is actually food, because the world population is expected to go up to over 10 billion by 2050, and we just don't have enough land to produce enough food. And people who have done life cycle analysis know that beef is actually the worst kind of meat that you can have, because the amount of, I think 1 kilogram of beef requires gazillion gallons of water because you have to let the cow graze, and there's a lot of methane emissions. There's a lot of fertilizer use that eventually creates what's called eutrophication, because the nitrogen goes into the water and creates algae bloom. And of course, creating fertilizers also requires a lot of carbon emissions. So it has been shown that if you avoid having meat and instead have vegetarian-based diet, that actually reduces the sustainability, the carbon emissions substantially. So since we talk so much about plastics, everybody says, why are you serving in glass instead of plastic? Shouldn't airlines actually take the lead and say, oh, you're going to fly just for one 14-hour trip? Do customers, can airlines boldly say that henceforth, I'm not going to serve beef at all? Maybe just have a bit, I mean, even seafood has a higher emissions than vegetables, but it's a 14-hour flight. Why not just have broccoli, right?
Yeah. And he asked broccoli because he knows it's my favorite. So I eat a lot of vegetables. So you were asking the right person, what is the topic. So Okay, first of all, I know this whole thing about, meat and so on with CO2, right? But again, it's about a customer choice. So we actually don't really force people to eat vegetable, right? This is for sure. People should have a choice of what they want to eat. What we do is actually giving people a choice to opt out of their food.
Okay.
So honestly, a 14 hours flight. Normally we start in the evening and there will be 2 meal service, right? So for 2 meal service, the first meal service normally actually happening after midnight, which is for me not my usual dinner time. I would sleep by then. So normally I skip that meals. And if we don't provide an opting out solution, actually we have a lot of food waste on board. So now what we are doing, and actually I'm very proud because my team actually won the second prize of the Lufthansa Global Innovation Challenge this year to actually implement this project to really having an opting out options for meals on board. But then the client take the completely cost of that meal that we have to produce. For example, business class, to produce the whole meal, it costs so and so. They can invest into sustainability project. So this is something that we are trying to do to, first of all, raise the awareness that let's not eat if you don't need it, right? And secondly, you can actually do really good things out of whatever you have purchased. So this is what we are trying to do. We are not trying to force passengers to eat vegetable, even though I really like vegetable, but no. But people can make conscious choice. And what the best thing the airline or a brand can do is to give people a choice, and from there you decide what you want to do next.
Okay. So follow-up question on that. What is the take-up rate for this opting out? Do you have any statistics or data available?
Yeah, so basically, opting out, it depending on when the flight is,
Okay.
right? So we have a lot of international flight, and what we see actually for the international flight departing in the evening, actually half of the aircraft will opt out.
They do? Okay.
Because people sleep.
Okay.
Yeah, because...
And this is across country, nationality?
this is what we see in Thailand so far.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so we're
That's
just
great.
testing the phase. And so at first, we were like, okay, let's ask people to opt out, but then it's also kind of meaningless that you just opt out, and what do we do with the cost of the meal, right? Because anyway, customer pay for that already. So now we are really trying to see, okay, what kind of project we want to opt in. Yeah, a lot of them want to do the charity project. A lot of people want to also have tree plants somewhere.
So this is the project is chosen by the customer, or is chosen
They
by...
can choose.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So for now, we're actually testing now at the airport. So if you would be flying us, I think next week, you actually see my team asking every single person at the boarding gate, what do you want to do with it? So we don't have a process in place automatically yet, but we are now in a testing phase to see what kind of project people are asking for.
Okay.
And if they want to opt out the meal, are they happy with that? Because once again, sometimes customers who opt out via an email, let's say 3 days before you fly, you forgot that you opt out, right? And then people start complaining like, where's my meal? And then people, so we have to see now how it's also affect the customer happiness ratio. Okay. And then we see we can actually implement it later in the future. Yeah.
So I have to admit I'm guilty as charged in this regard. So your competitor in Singapore also has this opting out thing. So sometimes I go to India for a Ayurveda retreat, and when I take the flight back, it's always a red-eye flight, and when I click, it says, but they don't tell me what projects they're going to invest on. It just says opt out. And for me, the worry is I'm going in the evening and I have to take a long drive from wherever I am. And if I suddenly feel hungry, I don't want a situation where I have a low sugar issue, right? So I've never opted out, but I've never had that red-eye flight meal. And I mean, we all, if we touch our heart and look at things that we can do more sustainably in a sense, there are many things we can change in our own lives, and opting out is one thing I should do in the future. So thank you so much, Anlee. I think now it's time to sort of open it up to the folks here to see whether you have any questions so that we can make it very interactive. So who would like to ask?
Yeah, we had the first questions here.
Over there.
Okay. I'll give him first.
Well, I mean, they raised first, let them go.
Thank you. My comment or my question would be for airlines. It seems like you're passing much of the sustainability efforts to the client rather than keeping most of themselves, right? These things that you're saying, like, okay, choose the meal, make the intermodal flight intermodal transportation. Have you ever tried taking Deutsche Bahn train and being wherever you're headed on time? I mean, that does not happen.
I know what you mean. Yeah, thank you very much for even raising that. Yeah.
And then just mentioning that, I mean, it's okay. I think those are respectable and commendable efforts. But have you ever thought about something like entrepot flights, right? Where, I don't know, maybe one airline could forfeit the benefit of certain tickets and pass the passengers to an airline which has I don't know, maybe 30% of the flight remaining. So if your flight is very low in terms of attendance, you could pass those passengers to the other flight, forfeit any it,
Yeah.
and then that way you're really the airline itself is really committing to avoiding excess fuel consumption, etc., etc. I don't see that. Never. I have not seen any airline do that.
Okay, then I guess you haven't fly so much with us. So we actually do that. So for us, the European network is very dense. So some destination we even fly, I think, every single half an hour there's a flight, right? And if the flight is actually not so full, we cancel it and we push passenger to the next flight. Never earlier, because people actually need to be at the airport at a certain time, but we actually push passenger to the next flight. Customer happiness, I'm not sure, because sometimes people really complain about it. But basically, sometimes we have to really explain that the reason why we're doing that is simply operational efficiency is not there. So it's just, you just have to try to cut it off. Understand about Deutsche Bahn part. Basically, I think I'm a very lucky person because I never have that issue being in Germany a lot, but all of my friends were like, you don't know what is going on, and I'm like, okay, yes, understand on that, but also, in a way, both parties have to improve, right? So also for Deutsche Bahn, they know that we rely so much on them now, and therefore they also need to improve, and this is already a promise that they have to work on a lot of things. So we just hope for the better in the futures. Another thing, we thought that this intermodality only existing in Europe, but actually last month, Lufthansa launched together with Rail Korea the intermodality. So now you can fly all the way from Germany or from Switzerland or whatsoever to Korea, to Seoul, and from there connecting with a train to another A destination. So that's also what we are doing at the moment. And next stop will be also somewhere nearer to here. And I hope one day that I can just go to Nana BTS and go to Europe from there. That would be my dream, actually, one day it happening. So we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, just to comment on that, the challenge for a premium airline is if you actually push passengers to the next flight, then people might accuse you of being a no-frills, low-cost carrier. Because low-cost carriers do it all the time, but they have the cost in reducing the cost in mind and not the customers in mind. So there has to be adequate communication as well to say that we are doing it not to actually put you in discomfort. We are doing it because, and maybe if it's done a few days earlier. So this is a very operational issue, and I'm sure airlines will probably do it more in the future. But there has to be some kind of a compensation also for the customer, right?
Yeah.
The customers can, of course, waive the compensation.
But also, I think this is not happening a lot lately. Maybe you haven't seen it lately because all the flights are full. So everything will operate because every single flight we have out of here is full, to Europe also full, and from Europe onward. So yeah, you don't see it this time, really.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay. Paul here in the front.
Ms. Doe, thank you very much for your talk. It's been very informative. My understanding is that a lot of studies are showing that the majority of emissions from the airline industry is actually from condensation trails from planes. So basically, the emissions from aircrafts bonding with water vapor, and that's actually creating probably more emissions than the actual burning of fuel itself. And this is largely a problem that's not necessitating the development of new fuels. Obviously, sustainable aviation fuels would be great, but we're still a number of years away from the impact of sustainable aviation fuels. Whereas I think if airlines were looking at ways of optimizing routes, optimizing schedules, possibly through AI, through some sort of data analysis, you can have a drastic, immediate impact on these contrails. Is Lufthansa looking at some of these solutions more on the software side, more on the route optimization side? Because it seems like this would be, to the professor's point, low-hanging fruit. It's actually big impact, attacking the biggest problem without needing some sort of moonshot hardware innovation. I think a lot of the technology exists today. So what are some of the things that Lufthansa might be doing in this area?
So, I can share that from the ground operation. So what you are asking now is more on the ground operation things, right? They prepare the flight and to make sure how it goes out, right? So due to several political constraints at the moment, I have to admit that we don't fly to certain destination in the most optimum route, because then the sky was closed in certain area, right? So sometimes the flight take longer now because we have to avoid certain area and so on. But other than that, actually, we work very closely together with Google and Microsoft. So now even our ground operation team, actually, they use completely AI to actually plan for flight operation. And actually, they always double check, right? Because people always double check to see if the supervisor of that flight actually accept the map or the plan, the operation plan that AI provided, and actually 9 out of 10, they accepted it. So meaning AI is so good that in the end, it was just one case per 10 case that they will push back, said no, they don't agree with this, and they want to go manual. So far, it's been working quite well with our innovation in ground ops, and I'm quite happy with that. But the routing of flying, yes, I have to admit some destinations, due to the sky traffic right, we have to fly in a longer route.
Can I ask, just from hearing, so you said it's out of ground ops. So does that mean that if the airline finds an optimal flight, you have to set it before the flight, but are you able to adjust in real time mid-flight
yes,
the AI?
The pilot can do that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So normally before the flight they have to have like a prep deck. So this is where they see already the route, the weather, and whatsoever. So it's more or less what they actually will look forward to do as an operation. But of course, during the flight they can always change because something can happen for sure, right? Yeah. So that's how it is.
Fascinating. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Maybe I can, I'm not an aviation sector expert, but we have a air traffic management institute at NTU. And I've looked at, because I've done some rail optimization, so I thought I should look at airline. To me, airline is also something like rail. But what I understood at least 3-4 years ago was that once a flight leaves, say, Frankfurt and it's bound for Singapore, the Singapore air traffic controller comes into the picture only in the last 1 hour of the flight, after it is in the Straits of Malacca. So by then it's too late to make any planning. So if you have to do what you say in terms of route optimization, you need to actually know what's going to happen in Singapore. Typically what happens in Singapore is during peak hours, essentially they end up circling quite a few times, which means a lot of fuel is burned. You need to anticipate that in advance and do the planning. And that requires multiple stakeholders. So the airline industry practices is such that they go from one air traffic control region to the next. And maybe that's where she was implying that it's political as well. So the technology is there, but it's also getting all the players together and doing it in advance. That's a bit challenging. As far as contrails go, I learned about contrails only 4-5 months ago, and I had a EMBA participant who works in tails, I think. I was told that contrails stay in the atmosphere only for a little while, so they don't create as much carbon. He wasn't sure, so they're actually doing research on contrails, but they probably don't harm in terms of carbon dioxide emissions as much as the fuel does. That's my understanding. I could be, in sustainability we learn new things all the time.
Same with my understanding as well.
Yeah.
I think it's all about the global warming potential of the GWP. So it's like it stays in the atmosphere not as long. But it's like methane. Because it's not as long, if you can reduce it, you don't have to wait 100 years to see the impact of reduced carbon. If you can reduce water vapor, you see the impact right away.
Yeah, but there are specialized companies like Thales actually working on it. That's my understanding. We had a MBA participant. In fact, he won the gold medal in the convocation. So, yeah. So, other questions? We have time for a few more questions, I think.
Thanks a lot for both of you have the insights on this. Just quick question around the going to a new aircraft purchase versus retrofitting the old one to save minus 30%, etc. in this decision, besides the business case and ROI, is there any point, any instant discussion around the life cycle of CO2 footprint, making a new production airplane plus moving the plane from one place to A to B? Does it also counter in that direction, in that decision, or it's more minus 30% is the only one driver?
So I'm just trying to rephrase your questions now. So you're asking that if the CO2 footprint of reusing the old aircraft, but improving it, right?
Yeah.
Actually making a difference compared to buying a new one.
Yeah, production of new one means
Yeah.
usually the production facility itself is the main footprint. Yeah.
So what I can say is that definitely the new one actually produce less CO2, because also for Boeing and Airbus, they improve their supply chain way much better than comparing to before. The decisions of using the old one or not, for us is also CO2 footprint, because basically you have to transport spare parts and trying to get things together, right? Rather than having everything at the shop of Airbus and Boeing and just get it ready and fly to the destinations. Another thing is also really about maintenance costs. Because the moment you start doing that, then you have something that is not based on the catalog, and the cost of maintenance is actually quite a lot. Because then, you have things that is really customized, and you have to do things a bit differently.
Yeah, and airline industry is also unique in the challenges in terms of safety and reliability and so on. But this is something I'm very passionate about, circular economy, and we are just still scratching the surface. And I tell my class that we should actually be, when we are planning for iPhone 15, we should be thinking about iPhone 20. And whatever components can be recycled into a new phone. So you are actually selling a phone with recycled components in it, and you're selling it as a new phone. The mindset has to change. Maybe in airline it will be difficult because the whole complexity of the aircraft will come into picture. But there are industries, I learned from our partners in the tire industry. I mean, I heard about tire retreading when I was a kid. The tire retreading was a thing that was, because purely from a cost point of view at that point in time. Now tire retreading has actually made a comeback. So there are actually companies, tire companies, I won't mention the name, they actually don't sell tires to the bus transport provider in Singapore. They sell it as a service, and they make sure that the tire is retreated 7 or 8 times before it's eventually, and of course it never goes into a landfill. They try to make sure that they recover through pyrolysis, they recover the rubber and the carbon black, or eventually burn it for energy. So is it possible in airline? I'm not so sure, but there is another area in airlines where they actually practice circular economy from a business case point of view, and I found this out from YouTube videos. Apparently, the business class, the first class seats in an airline cost about $150,000 to make. Business class seat is about 50 to 100,000. Economy class is about 5 to 10,000. And the seats, the life of the aircraft is much longer than the life of the seat, simply because of the constraints. They don't replace it with new seats. There are specialized providers who actually take the seats back, refurbish and remanufacture it and use it. And for the airline, it makes a economic business case because it's a low margin business. So even though they're willing to spend large amounts on the aircraft, they don't want to spend too much money on buying new seats. So there are cases where airlines actually do this as well.
But I think also, one typical example is also on our maintenance, repair, overhaul service. So now, what I know from my colleague from the engineering side is that we actually have an app where we know exactly where a spare engine is. So when something actually breaks down, it's quite easy to coordinate. And then the moment you coordinate that over, then you get the engine that need to be fixed somewhere else, and then from there you can just transfer to the next, right? So it works like almost like a repair shop, but online, and then where people know exactly where to find what, and that really helps overall. Like it's just rotating.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take 1 or 2 more questions, right? Okay.
Thank you. So we talk about how much this company emits, How accurately are companies reporting emissions? That's one. And two is how mature is the auditing ecosystem for emissions reporting right now?
You want to, okay.
Yeah, for us, so basically, if you're talking about emissions, so what we actually do, so our client want to know how much they emit actually per year, right? So I'm talking now on this part of B2B sales first. So for B2B sales, which is we manage corporate with contract. So in our contract, actually there's a calculator behind of, let's say, this is the amount of flight you have taken, this is the amount of emission you have already emit into the environment. And the corporate want to offset from that, then this is the amount of SAF that they have to purchase. So that is how we do it from the sales side for B2B. B2C, as a separate client, you can go to, let's say, Lufthansa.com to buy a ticket. And on there, you can actually get linked to that calculator where you just input, I'm going from this flight, let's say from Bangkok to Munich, sitting on economy class, how much CO2 emission you actually put into the environment. And then from there, you know exactly how much, right? But I know the story of the calculation can be slightly different from one place to the next, which actually we need to find a way to kind of standardize it completely. I know that our calculation is actually normally higher than the usual. So it's like, we do even an extra on top, but I would actually appreciate that in the future, everything is standardized. Auditing, I can talk in the part of auditing how we use the sustainable aviation fuel. So basically, when the moment the customer purchases it, we have to use it within 6 months. So it doesn't mean that you purchase for, let's say for Thailand, it's going to be used on a Thailand flight, but it's going to be used somewhere else. But we have really a standalone, third-party auditor to do that, so that when we issue the Scope 3 certificate, it is actually correctly done and it's already been used. So this is what we are doing as auditing part from aviation, sustainable aviation fuel. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay.
So you mentioned about forestation to offset the CO2 emission. Is there other modes of carbon capture technology that you're looking at or you invested in? And how efficient it is to offset the CO2 with deforestation?
Yeah, I mean, but that's why I said this is something that is not immediate effect. Because when you actually want to make a forest, like really make a forest, take years until it's actually go into place, right? I mean, here locally, we also do one of this project about mangrove plantations, and we can even see from the the satellite how is it growing and so on. And honestly, for me, I mean, I'm not sure if all of them will survive with the climate. Yeah, so I mean, I can speak from my honest experience. We do it every year as a team here. We try to have this one area for mangrove growth, and we see how they grow actually year after year. But honestly, the amount of them that can survive compared to when you try to grow them, actually not so many. Like the effort is much more, and for a forest, it takes years until then. So for me, to ask me measuring, I'm not really sure, to be honest. So this is a long-term project, yeah.
Yeah, so they are recording. Normally in my class, I say that it's Chatham House rules. Yeah. I'm very open in talking about things. It's being recorded, so my lips are sort of sealed. The credits are a bit of a... But that said, I mean, Changi Airport just few days ago launched a system where whenever you buy a plane ticket, you can actually find out what the carbon emissions is. It's based on standard formula. And then you have an option to actually buy offsets. Yeah. Either the offset is for afforestation projects. I think they had one option for actually implementation of a renewable energy project where it's replacing an existing fossil fuel based project, right? So whenever there are these credits, lots of questions have to be asked, and in the industry is gradually sort of maturing. Singapore is actually trying to make a big play in terms of being a trading place for carbon credits, but there are inherently a lot of challenges out there. Yeah. And to me, I was just reading the newspaper last week. The cost per ton to buy these credits is only about, cost per ton of carbon emissions, it's only about 14 Singapore dollars. Whereas in reality, if you want to use any technologies like CCUS, it's more than $100, $150. So, so if you ask me, will I buy, if I'm buying a Lufthansa ticket or a SIA ticket, and it gives me an option to offset. Rather than doing offset, I might do other charitable projects. That's
Yeah.
let me put it that
So
way.
yeah, but remember also, like we talk about sustainability is not only about just, offsetting CO2, right? Because also now we're getting our customer to choose also between you want to donate now into forestry or you want to actually help the community. So, and all of that is actually quite a long-term project. I honestly don't know how to measure. I have to look it up now. I mean, how do we measure this forestry project? Because what I've seen from my mangrove project here is that, not all of them survive. So we'll have to see. Yeah.
Okay, let's take this one last question and then.
All right, thank you. I just want to ask, what is the sanction for the state that failed to reduce the carbon emission by 2050?
What is the sanction if
Sanction,
you fail
right,
to
right.
reduce?
And another question is, which one is the international organization regulating this?
Okay, you stumped me with both the questions. As far as I know, just like Paris agreement in 2015, it was voluntary. At the moment, there's a lot of peer pressure the peer pressure didn't exist even 4 years ago. All these net zero promises are being made now, right? If you're a private company, there are people looking at it very carefully, right? So F1 race, for example, has promised to be net zero by 2030. Of course, they're going to do net zero with SAF, what is called SAF credits, right? Because you cannot, if you fly an airline, if they don't use sustainable fuel, there's no way you can abate it. So just like renewable energy credits, you have to buy credits, right? Is there a penalty by 2050? The penalty probably comes in terms of ostracization, and eventually climate change is probably going to create a lot more havoc in a sense. So it's more of at this moment it's not very clear, right? So, but there is enough peer pressure going around. Why would otherwise China say, I'm going to do it by 2060? Why would India say, I'll do it by 2070? There is subtle pressure going around, and we see the negative effect of climate change already. And going forward, the prediction is that we'll have more weather-related events which are which become more severe because of climate change. And I think the other thing that should be mentioned is McKinsey actually came out with the figure of $9 trillion per year to be invested to address climate change. And as Anlee mentioned earlier, it's an investment. We are not just burning up dollars. It's actually investment that creates the green economy. And do you know how much countries committed to when COVID happened in 2020? How much money countries committed to in terms of increased budgets? Turns out that it is exactly equal to $9 trillion. So when COVID was clear and present, countries were willing to invest so much money into addressing COVID as a challenge. Unfortunately, the politicians have to balance between because if they do too much too quickly, they go out of power, right? I mean, there was a prime minister called Julia Gillard in Australia. 7 prime ministers ago, she implemented carbon tax too early, some $25 carbon tax in 2012 or 11. And she didn't even last 1 year because the mining lobby in Australia was very strong. So the idea is to sort of commit to it now, and then there's a lot of peer pressure and moral pressure on all the entities, whether it's a private company or governments, to do it. At the moment, there's no penalty, as far as I know. Right? Yeah. So eventually, So that's the other thing. See, the Europe will actually implement. I mean, they thought about it 10 years ago. It never happened. Any aircraft that lands in Europe will have to pay a carbon tax eventually, right? So and they have to implement what's called e-fuels, which is similar to sustainable aviation fuel. So there's pressure coming from all sides, which sort of makes sure that you don't just make empty promises and kick the can down the road. You have to actually act on it. And observers can see that even 3-4 years, the changes have been very quick. So as climate optimists, we have to believe that there will be even more pressure on the companies as well as countries. Right? So if there are no further questions, thank you so much for your interaction and being here. We're going to get a fresh set of food served outside.
Second service here.
Yeah, I'm sure together with me, I've learned so much, and when I get on my plane tomorrow, I have so much to think about how much carbon offsets I have to make and so forth. But it has been very informative for me, as I'm sure for you. So can you join me in just thanking both Prof. Vish and Anlee again with your warm applause? And just to show a very small token of appreciation to both of them, I'd just like to present to them just a small gift.